Hello.
Hello.
Hi. How's everybody this week? We are excited to be back. I am Ann Merchant, and I work for the National Academy of Sciences, and I am joined by.
I'm Rick Lovert. I also work for the National Academy of Sciences for the Science and Entertainment Exchange.
Exactly. So we are excited to bring you another shared program with our colleagues at the cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences. And for various technical reasons, poor JD has there's a boiler being replaced in his building, which is apparently providing a cacophonous background. So I think that Rick, you and I are now responsible for doing a little bit of introduction of the cultural programs. But I'm going to start by at least talking a little bit about what the National Academy of Sciences is and what we do in the world, and to provide some context for today's discussion. So we are a private nonprofit institution in Washington, D.C. I have not been in that institution since March, but we sometimes get to look at some virtual backgrounds that remind us of the incredible building on Constitution Avenue that we have there. But the work that we do is obviously very present in current events because science is really necessary right about now. But we also do a lot of things that bring together art and culture. That's certainly the mission of the cultural programs, and it's based a lot. There was a 2018 convening that we did called Branches from the Same Tree. And I think it's based on an Einstein quote. I had looked it up and I think it's in the report where he had said that branches of the same tree help us understand the value of exploring the intersection of arts, humanity, and the sciences, because art and science are branches of the same tree, ennobling our lives, lifting it to the sphere above the sphere of mere physical existence. So we can't do much better than that. And so the cultural programs in particular, run by JD Tolasik and his colleague Alana Quinn, they are really responsible for giving us that opportunity to see where those intersections lie and how important it is to explore them. And it's one of the reasons we've been very happy to do these conversations, creativity in the time of COVID, because it feels like a sweet spot for us and for the Science and Entertainment Exchange. So Rick, I'm going to pass it to you now to explain a little bit about the Science and Entertainment Exchange. Although I did want to say that this is the week that they are announcing the Nobel Prizes, and pretty much if you're a Nobel Prize winner, you're probably also a member of the National Academy of Sciences, or it'll get you in, something like that.
So my name is Rick Lovert. I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange. If you are a writer, producer, studio executive, storyteller, novelist, video game executive, you have a question about science as you're making media, you can call us at 844-NEED-SCI. There you go. The number's up. Sachi, thank you.
It's a real number.
It's a real phone number, and we will connect you with someone, an expert, using the vast connections of the National Academy of Sciences to scientists from all over the country and the world to answer your question for free. And we've done over 3,200 consults since we opened our doors on movies like Avengers Infinity War, Man of Steel, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, many others. And we've done over 300 events like this that are designed to sort of stir your creative pot and give you some ideas as a creative person, or, you know, if you're just science interested, if you're science curious. Now, if you are a STEM professional and you're tuning into this event for the first time and just learning about us, please be in touch if you're interested in having some of these conversations. We're always looking for people to connect with Hollywood professionals. Briefly, I want to thank the team, AV by Ameche, thank you. The whole office in DC, Courtney Sloan, Jeff Fishman, and of course, here with me in LA, Sachi Gerben. I also really need to thank our sponsors like Howard Hughes Medical Institute, without whom this event would not be possible today, but also the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and individual donors. Many of you gave for this event today, and that funding goes right back into doing more of these events and, frankly, keeping the lights on. So thank you.
Making sure you can pay your grocery bill.
That's right. That's right. I don't know where oh, here it is. And if you give it a supporter level, we will send you one of these as a thanks, and you will also have unique access to events and some VIP Q&A. So hopefully if you are able to give at that level, then we would love to include you in that community. A little bit about today's event structure. Down below here, there is a Q&A box. At any point during the conversation, you can fire away a question, and I am going to have a direct line to Gillian, our moderator today. Thank you, Gillian. And she will get the question. If your question is not answered, it's totally my fault. We're always get more questions asked than we have time for. We'll get to as many as humanly possible. But please, if you have a question, throw it into the Q&A and I'll pass it to the moderator.
Exactly. And I did want to add a special thanks for today's event to Jen Risco at Shelf Awareness. She is the co-founder and publisher at Shelf Awareness, which is the largest e-newsletter to the book trade, but relevant to probably many of you. There also is a Shelf for Readers that comes out on Tuesdays and on Fridays. And I think the mission there is to sort of put a spotlight on the 25 best books that are out and about, and they're picked by librarians, by bookstores, independent bookstores, and by experts such as Jen, who has been working in book publishing for many, many years. And she just also happens to be one of my very closest friends in the entire world. So we're really grateful to her because she introduced us to Kevin. That's a big thing. And then, as you know, a lot of times what we do at the beginning of the event is that Rick and I kind of go down our little personal rabbit hole. So I also wanted to say, apropos of Jen, this is what she made me. She knitted this for me, and her name is Marigold. So I thought that was a very nice thing to receive in the mail. And in fact, I received this in the mail from her today. Jen, if you are out there, thank you for the pear butter from your farm, because I very much appreciate it. And I have a history of talking about things in my pantry. But the other thing that I also wanted to point to was that if you don't know about it, it's called 6-Word Memoirs by Larry Smith. He curates them, and he's done a special collection during the time of the pandemic. I especially liked, Hi, oh wait, my mic's off. I thought that was a good one. Not a Criminal, but Running Masked. Can't Even Bother to Be Lazy. The World Has Never Felt Smaller. And Read Every Book in the House. And I think that I have too many books in my house to have read them all, but I'm on a mission to get through some of them that I hadn't been able to get to. So I think you have a book that you want to tell us about.
I did. I got this book this week. I am so impressed with it. So Hal Leonard, for those of you who play musical instruments, does usually like music theory books. This one is Every Note Jimi Hendrix Ever Played on a Recording. And I think the purple's messing with my green screen. But it's a great book, but what I was particularly impressed with is the whole thing is purple on like velvet. It's amazing. It's an amazing book. High recommend, and gives me lots of projects to do with my guitar. So highly recommend.
So it's connected to your other rabbit hole, which is usually musical and guitar driven. So
that's right.
Come back next week with more guitar information. But in the meantime, we actually have an event for you today. And we, as I said, we're super grateful because we were connected to Kevin by Jen Risco. We have other people that were already kind of in our network. But the person that we thought of first to moderate this conversation was Gillian. When Rick and I were like, well, I don't know, who do you think? I think we came out with it at exactly the same time. Gillian is someone whom we've known for a long time. But I think most importantly, Gillian is perhaps one of the most curious and intellectually engaged people whom I have the pleasure to know. That when you talk to her, there's not a lot of just sort of small talk. Like, she's really listening. She really wants to know things, and she will ask what she wants to know. So that's exactly what you want in a moderator. And she is part of our exchange committee. So we're very happy to have her there. The committee is sort of our brain trust of people where we turn to when we have questions.
Deric Hughes also on the committee.
Exactly. I was getting there. But that's okay. That's all right. So we're very happy. And I wanted to briefly share my screen because if this introduces Gillian, this perhaps better than almost anything else is a picture of Ziggy in a raincoat, and it's her dog. And he is there with her today, co-moderating. So I just wanted to, point that out. If I can.
Did it go?
Yep. I'm gonna share. I just had to get Ziggy up. There he is. There he is, Ziggy in a raincoat, co-moderating. So if you hear barking when Gillian is trying to moderate, it is because Ziggy is just doing his job for us. So we're going to turn it over to you now, Gillian, and the rest of the amazing panel. And I should say that Lauren Gunderson comes to us from cultural programs. So we really appreciate that connection. So we're going to give it to you now, Gillian.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for introducing Ziggy so that his bark does not announce him later in the conversation. I'm gonna bring up my panelists right away. Please welcome author Kevin O'Brien, playwright Lauren Gunderson, and screenwriter Deric Hughes. So you guys should start your videos now. Hello, Lauren. Your mic is off. You can leave it off for the moment if you. Oh, there we go. Good. Do we have Kevin? Here's Kevin. Great. Hello, everybody. I wanted to start with giving you guys like a total softball question before I get into the real meat of our conversation today. But what are you watching? That's the question that like all of my friends are discussing right now. Like, what do we feel like watching? For me, it is mostly older stuff. I'm definitely kind of taking comfort in remembering days before. At the moment, that would be the 70s horror collection on the Criterion Channel. There's actually a movie called Coma that was directed by Michael Crichton that I've never seen before that I started this morning. So far I'm intrigued. But what are the rest of you watching?
Have you found Ed Harris is in coma for like about 2 seconds?
Oh, I haven't gotten to the Ed Harris part yet.
Look for Ed Harris in coma. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Great. Well, since I butted in, I might as well tell you what I'm watching. I'm on Deadline right now. Whenever I'm on Deadline, I watch a series, and so I can just like treat myself. So like I think last year was Glee. The year before was like Will and Grace. This year it's Grey's Anatomy. I have never watched Grey's Anatomy. So
how interesting.
Yeah.
That's going to be relevant to our conversation in a moment.
I know.
Lauren, what are you watching?
I just discovered that show Normal People on Hulu. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's so like simple and human, and like the microscope is just very tight, and I just find that really refreshing and great.
Mm-hmm. Same. That's one of the few new things that I have watched in the last 7 months. Deric, what about you?
Everything. Lovecraft Country, The Boys. Haven't started Utopia yet, but I've heard it's pretty good, so I'm gonna check that out. Right. But then I'm also a night owl because thanks to the panpocalypse. So a lot of insomnia theater, as I call it. But when I'm procrastinating late at night, watching a lot of reruns of television. So like New Girl, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Friends, cool. Whatever is, basically what's playing in the background.
It's food for television, as television.
Yeah.
For me, that's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So actually bringing us back to Grey's Anatomy, the timing of Rick calling me last week and asking me if I wanted to do this, it was really interesting because I think right after I spoke with him, there was an article that popped up on Deadline that was about the new season of Grey's Anatomy. And it was sort of laying out the process that they came to. And it begins with the showrunner saying that when they started their writer's room back up, the showrunner said to the group, I think that Grey's Anatomy is a show that's about escapism. People come to us because they want to forget about the problems of their lives. So I think that we should set the show in a world in which the pandemic never happened. But I challenge you writers to like convince me I'm wrong. And one of the other writers in the show said, well, I think that this is the most important medical story of our lifetime. So how do we not tell that story? And ultimately they decided to do that. And the really interesting realization that I had was Grey's Anatomy is set in Seattle, and Washington was the state where the very first cases came in the US. So they're telling the story of, at least at the beginning of the next season, what they've announced is that the show begins in the beginning of 2020 in the hospital as those early cases were arriving. So as a person who used to watch Grey's Anatomy religiously, but hasn't in a few years, I am very eager to go and see this version of the story. So I think this kind of frames our conversation nicely, because I think that the big question today is, there's sort of two for me. There's one, do audiences want escapism or do they want catharsis and exploration? And two, what are the stories that we want to tell? So I'm going to ask you guys some more specific questions that'll kind of get into those, but that to me is like the overall question that I'm thinking about a lot. on the mostly film and some TV side of things. Like, what are the things that audiences are going to want to see in the next 1, 2, 3 years? So I guess for all of you, and I'll start with Kevin, to what extent do you typically integrate current events into your writing? Kevin, you and I were talking a little while ago about the fact that you were already a published author by the time 9/11 happened. I was in film school at the time, and I remember being sort of horrified when my professor told me that I should be writing about what was going on. At the time, it struck me as incredibly callous, though I have a better understanding of what she was saying today. But how was that experience for you? Did that event find its way into your writing? And yeah.
Well, I actually, most of my stuff is sort of thriller escapism. I write stories like, The Call Came from Inside the House type of thrillers. And so I tend not to give time specific to when I'm actually writing and when it will be published. So it just reminds me of something I know some famous writer, and I can't remember who it was, had said, if you are experiencing anything personally, don't write about it at the time. Right. Wait a few years so you have a perspective on it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of followed that back when 9/11 happened. I didn't mention 9/11 in any of my books until about 4 or 5 years later. And I don't know. I don't advise that for everybody, but that's the way I operate it.
Yeah. I think that is. I remember when I got out of film school and was first starting to work at a production company, there were scripts that would come in that were about 9/11. And I remember reading the scripts for both World Trade Center and United 93. Yeah. And each led to really kind of heated debates in our office about whether it was an appropriate time to tell those stories yet.
Yeah. I used to work in a video store part-time, like when you're a writer, you're so isolated. So, which I'm sure we're going to get to that later. But, and when United 93 came out on video, it was still too soon for a lot of people. I would say, this is a really great movie, you should check it out. And they were like, nope, it's too soon. I can't watch this movie. Yeah. Right. So you never know.
Yeah. Lauren, what about you? I'm also teeing this up because you were telling me about something that you're working on now. So
yeah, yes.
How do you operate, and what are you up to these days?
Well, a lot of my work is in the history, especially the history of science, and as that relates to feminism, intersexual feminism. And so I feel like telling stories about specific moments in other times in history is actually a really wide door open to how we understand now, without it being about now, and thus being so specific that it can't have a broader life and mean something to people in the future if it's so specific. But it's also, anytime that I think that I've written something that's too specific, they'll do this play for a few years and then it'll wear out. There's a play about that I thought was just perfect for the Obama administration that people are doing all the time now because it's about hyperpartisan politics and where that stems from, and how actually the founders, that was one of their biggest fears, was partisanship driving the nation. So, I think that I have a plan for these things, and then you just write something that is meaningful, powerful, and human, and it'll probably be relevant in a lot of different ways. And it kind of changes the prescription of the glasses, but you're still getting something kind of clear. That's a weird metaphor, but anyway, but yes. So for this moment in a pandemic, I thought that, for the first couple of weeks, I didn't really write anything. I was just befuddled and scared and just, what is this moment we're in? I didn't feel like I had any ground to stand on in order to do what I do as a writer, which is to bear witness and to try to structure meaning and what the hell is going on, But I have had a bit of a secret weapon, which my husband is Dr. Nathan Wolfe, who is one of the world's foremost virologists with a specialty in pandemics. So here I am waking up every morning.
Responsibility.
Yeah. And, very early he was going, this thing is not going away. And I never, in our whole life together, I've never seen him get that worried that quickly, and kind of every day watching him be like, oh shit. So it felt really like my antenna were up from January as this thing was playing out. And so a few months later, when I felt like I kind of knew enough, I started writing a show about him, which I never, ever thought I would do. So he jokes, he was like, well, I marry a playwright. When am I going to get my play? And that was a joke of, ha ha ha, never. I gave you 2 children instead. And now here we have this play, and it is not about COVID-19. It is not about the novel coronavirus. It's not about this moment. It's about a moment right before it. But it is about pandemics and a person whose specialty is predicting and preventing them and making us resilient to them. That's his whole work. And it was convenient that he found his way on the cover of Wired magazine in August, just a few months ago, because they'd interviewed him 10 years ago when he said, hey, pandemics, just like have a plan for this. And everyone's like, no, why would we need that? And then of course, now everyone's like, oh, so where was that insurance that you were developing for this very moment in time? So it's been really interesting to watch his brain work in the moment, his career, the trajectory. And, like everyone says, a good apocalyptic movie begins with somebody ignoring a scientist. And so here we are, living the dream. But I'm really excited about it. The play is called The Catastrophist, and it's a very intimate portrait of him in a way that a wife would know. Yeah. So I'm doing less research than I usually do, and more just turning over to him and be like, so what were you like when you were 10? Anyway.
And you said that that's being produced very soon.
Yes, it is we're doing a kind of a dual premiere production that is both in a theater company called Roundhouse, which is right outside of DC in Bethesda, amazing theater company, and a theater company, kind of my home theater, Marin Theater Company in the Bay Area. So they will do a dual premiere. It is digital, so anyone can see it, and we'll work on a stage. We're not doing it on Zoom. We're doing a live production, costume designed, lit, actor on a stage, but it will just be filmed in such high quality that you can it'll feel theater, even though it'll be digital.
Yeah, very cool. Deric, I know we discussed that the show that you are working on currently is not set in the present day, so you don't have the same sort of question to ask of, do we set the next season in the midst of the pandemic? But to me, television is the place that typically responds with the most immediacy. So I'm just kind of curious in general, like, have you worked on shows that deal with current events? Is the show that you're on right now talking about how to connect to audiences that are having this experience? Are your writer friends talking about this?
Yeah, my writer friends, absolutely. I mean, all my writer friends and colleagues. But here's the thing. It's like, the reality is, how do you top the TV series called 2020? I mean, it's like this. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a 12-part miniseries. I think we're in night 8 now. Or night 10, and this, I mean, it's just, it's like, how do it's like every month there's something crazy, right? UFOs, murder hornets. It's like, in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's like every time.
It's like we should sell the show 2020 to HBO now with the intention that we won't produce it for like 50
But here's the thing, that if you or I tried to pitch this, we would never be working in this ever again. They'd be like, what happened to Gillian and Deric? They tried to pitch this show called 2020, and last I saw that, like, Deric's working at Panera Bread. It's
well, why is that? Why would we never work again?
He's a writer anymore because they just didn't believe him. So, most of my shows that I've been working on, it's like from Flash, the Arrow, superhero. It's like we touch upon those type of things. There's always an episode of like the outbreak, the stuff like that, but never a whole season fixated on world-changing event like this. But I have friends and colleagues that work in shows that are much more grounded, I would say, that definitely have to address those things, and some have chosen to address, some others have not. It's interesting because I think that there is the, like you said, the back and forth of the conversations. Like, do some people want to relive this experience or continue to, here's the thing, it's like we'll probably still be living in this experience come next year. It's not like,
no, it's very true.
So,
I think, like, I always think about, I don't know if you were a West Wing fan, but West Wing did a really, I mean, it's just an interesting case study in terms of how they dealt with 9/11, because they had already started shooting they were well into shooting their new season when 9/11 happened. So they might have even started airing episodes, I'm not sure. But it was a couple episodes into the season, they had like this bottle episode, this standalone episode where there's a group of students who come to tour the White House, and there's some kind of crisis, and there's a lockdown at the White House, and the kids are stuck there for several hours. And as things happen in that TV show, every like major advisor of the president ends up in the kitchen at the same time with this group of kids. But they kind of used it as a way of exploring all the questions that we were talking about, and that's the beauty of that show, that you can overtly ask questions like, why do people hate us and want to do this to us? And then after that, we lived in a world in which terror was a persistent threat, and they introduced a fictional Middle Eastern country to be the enemy, so that it could avoid, I think, a lot of the controversy of using the real countries. I feel like in TV, if you are in a real world show, it's hard to ignore the events that have been going on. I think it's just so fundamentally changed. Like even a sitcom it's about like normal people living their lives so much of the time. They might be slightly abnormal people, but it's still people like living in the real world. In some way, I think you have to acknowledge that we've all had this experience of being isolated from each other. And I think that on the one hand, we'll get sick of these stories pretty quickly. So we have to kind of, I think that the beauty of the fact that we all kind of represent different parts of the business is that we're able to offer something to everyone. So for the people who want escapism, they can have it. And for the people who want catharsis, they're going to find that somewhere too.
Well, yeah, because we're living in the moment. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but every time I'm watching a show now, even if it's an old rerun of a show, I get uncomfortable if there's too many people in the room. I'm like, well, y'all need to set apart. Like, you touch that person a little too long. Like, you're not washing your hands. I'm not feeling comfortable about this.
100%. Yeah. And I have to keep reminding myself that they shot these things a long time ago. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, we touched on this a moment ago, but, Lauren, you were talking about the idea of it's sometimes easier to look to the past and not to talk about what's happening today. How do you guys feel about that? And I guess this kind of leads into this is a very big question, but do you feel any sense of responsibility to talk about the things that are happening right now, to try to educate people, to use your platform?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting to me writing, I write about science a ton. Most of my plays are about science in a dozen different ways. But when writing this play about Nathan, is the way he approaches his work and the way he applies his work to just being a person in the world is more on the Darwin side of things, like a general curiosity about how nature works, how on macro and micro levels, why does it work like this? What are viruses? What are they? Where do they come from? Are they in our tree of life? No, they're not. A totally different tree of life than every other thing on planet Earth. What? What does that mean? Oh my God. So this play that is ostensibly about viruses and about pandemics, wink, 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 not this one, but you know what I mean? But it actually is a chance to go, why is this fascinating? Why would anyone devote their life to study this thing? Yeah. And I've done this in astronomy, I've done it in like nuclear physics, I've done it in all different ways in other plays. But for this one, it is very interesting to me to step back and think, what about the grand container of thought about viruses, virology, all of it? How does it function? And what does it say about us? And of course, what a pandemic says is that we are way closer to each other and way more alike than we are different. The reason a pandemic happens is because we are all the same damn thing and we get the same damn diseases. And the closer we are and the more we need each other, and humans can't exist apart. So there's a great metaphor. So how do we play in that world? And when I write about science and history, so much of it is finding the right metaphor that means more than the science means. That means what is it we can't live apart in terms of the heart and in terms of memory and in terms of love and loss? Yes, we can talk about viruses, but we're also talking about human experience. So I kind of try to always straddle those worlds, because I think that's what makes a story gripping and human and emotional, and have it matter in a kind of gut way, not just like, oh, interesting. Oh, that's a nice little fact parade.
Your husband was an advisor on Contagion, right?
Yeah. He actually was at a tenured professor at UCLA for a while, so he did a bunch of Hollywood films. He did. Oh, I always forget. I Am Legend. Is that the Will Smith one with?
Sure.
Yeah, that one and a couple of other ones. So
got it.
Here he is back again.
Yeah, I mean, I think Contagion's a really interesting kind of case study for our situation, because as I'm sure most of you know, this was the most popular movie online at the beginning of our quarantine.
That and Jurassic Park, right? Which I'm like, interesting.
Not about Jurassic Park, but I mean, that kind of represents two different things. One is pure escapism, and the other one is sort of like informing people of what's to come. It's still shocking to me how accurate Contagion is to our experience.
I tried to find a way to order the suit that Jude Law wore, because I thought that I was going to.
Ethan had a couple of scenes with him. We can reach out and see if we can get it for you.
Yeah, see if I can get a hookup on that.
So funny.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what's so fascinating about this. I tend to think that what that tells us is that people do want to know. And this is what's interesting about writing about science, is it will become relevant. Give it long enough time, and all of these sci-fi shows will not be science fiction. They'll just be science eventually. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them, or the themes that they discuss, or the kind of core science. So trying to figure out, people want to know. They want to go, all right, there is a rule book for this. Can I read that rule book? I am certainly going through all of these stories of relevance. I mean, even the fictional, I mean, so much like Albert Camus and like all of these, writers and authors who have talked about various plagues, whether as metaphors or as literal plot-based story. Give us something,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm convinced War of the Worlds hasn't happened, because aliens have watched that movie too, and they're like, "Oh, they got the COVID? Oh, we're good. We're not going to because we saw what happens to us. So we're going to bypass Earth this time."
Let me know. Great, thank you. Indeed. But I always think about storytelling, whether it's film or novels or anything, as a bit of a thought experiment. We are playing out a set of rules in a contained experimental framework of the story, beginning of the story, end of the story. And we test out theories. If it's Hamlet, like, okay, well, what if your uncle did kill your dad and didn't get caught, but you knew? What would you do? Let's play that out. There you have Hamlet. So there's a lot of that going on right now too, I think. Like, what if somebody could predict COVID, but nobody listened? What if you could withstand? What if you were immune? What would you do if you were immune to this thing and nobody else? I don't know. I'm just making crap.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot there.
My personal, this is the very dark side of me that I'm not supposed to admit in front of the 300 participants that we have here. But there's certainly a part of me at the beginning of this that was like, I have been wanting my entire life to know if I would survive in the stand, and like what would happen after that. So the beginning of this, there was a little bit of it that I think was kind of exciting. Like, we didn't know what was going to happen. Very quickly, that gave way to boardom. But I do think that's
Did you think you're going to make your way to Colorado and join Mother Abigail? Or
of course. I don't even like Vegas now. So why would I like it under Randall Flagg? So yeah.
I was of your same thinking. When this began, I had a Zoom conference with some of my writer friends in Seattle, and one of them, Dave Bowling, was going on about, I can't do any kind of writing right now because I'm just so distracted. I'm so torn up. I feel so horrible about everything. And I was like, well, come on, we're isolated. This is what authors want to be. We all want to be, by ourselves. I remember Jamie Ford was once talking, who did the hotel on the corner of Bitter and Sweet. He was talking about how, all of us writers are like the Unabomber. We're isolated in our little, hovels doing our writing. And I was like, this is the best time for us to get started, and I was so full of crap. I was so full of crap because you can't focus. You can't, it's so hard to ignore what's going on outside. And even though you got all this isolation and like you're saying, Gillian, I suddenly went from being all gung ho to being totally bored and frustrated and
hard to concentrate. And then there's just the fact that it's not just the pandemic, as Deric was saying, it's 2020. There's murder hornets. There's, every other day, there's something new that's happening. It's very distracting. I was going to reference actually, I think it was the Burgess Meredith episode of the original
Twilight Zone.
And that's the thing I keep thinking about, where it's like, he's this like bitter man who just wants to be left alone to read. And then finally, there's like what is it? He's in like a vault when like nuclear war happens, and he comes out of it, and he's the only person left, and he's like a total sociopath who is perfectly happy to be left alone, and he finds a library and he stacks up all of his books, and then he breaks his glasses, and he's stuck there alone in the world, unable to read. I feel like I can relate to that a little bit. So
it's also interesting how. Go ahead, Deric.
Right? I was going to say, if the internet goes down, if my Wi-Fi goes down, I ain't got I don't have Netflix anymore. I have no other distractions. You mean I want to pick up a book, a real book? I was like,
I'm working on this other project with 2 other writers. So there's 3 playwrights working on one play. And we're like, what are we going to do? Let's work on something together. And so we knew we didn't want to talk about COVID, but the idea of being sheltered in place is so strange and unique to this moment. So we played with that, but instead of virus, it's like aliens are just here. They're just hovering over the earth, and everyone's like, but it has the same rules as now, except it's not a virus. It's like, we're playing with like, what are we learning about being alive under these conditions, but playing it out in a different way, because I think there is something so fascinating about what this has done to us, about isolation and about not being able to be near people, and how we communicate now, all Zoomy and everything. And so it's interesting how it's manifesting its way in different forms, and that's actually coming out soon at another Bay Area theater, at the Aurora Theater.
Also, how people react in their choices, right? Because before all this, whenever there was a zombie movie, a pandemic movie, people were like, "Oh, people wouldn't act that stupid. They wouldn't be that dumb." Like, no, that would never happen. People not wearing masks, because of infection. Get out of here. Ignoring science.
Well, we have some questions that are starting to stack up. So I'm going to read you guys some questions that are coming from our viewers. So first off, and some of these are a little lengthy. So what would you like to see different in intra and post-pandemic literature than what appeared and continues to appear in post 9/11 literature? So think about the way, that's a complicated, it's a big question. I would start off by saying that I think that there was a lot of at least television. I'm thinking specifically of 24, and like, as fun a show as 24 was, also the danger of 24 in terms of making us kind of culturally accept a lot of human rights abuses. I think that we all kind of think back on the missed opportunity of that moment as an opportunity to unify people. And I think like we're living in the most, polarized moment in history, I think. So personally, I would like to see, I'd like to see something like that. I'm going to look to the past to reference what I would like to see. Do you guys remember the movie And the Band Played On, about the scientists who identified the HIV virus? So it was such a great work in terms of like personalizing what was going on at the time, but also making the science of it feel compelling, and like it's a page turner. It's heart pounding action of looking through a microscope. I want to see that version of it that really shows the science and what's going on right now, what the scientists are racing to do. Like, I'm actually eagerly looking forward to that, and I hope that I hope that this experience, I mean, I'm speaking as a person who is on the planning committee for the Science and Entertainment Exchange, but I would hope that this experience makes young people more interested in science and wanting to go into these kinds of fields and study this.
Oh, I agree with you, Gillian. I think it would be so cool too, because not to get political, but I would just like to see science win. You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree with you.
I'm on the Aspen Institute Science and Society Committee, which gathers half scientists and half artists, but creators of all sorts, including coders and, you know, every sort of thing. And that was the first thing that when we met at the beginning of the shutdown. We were supposed to meet in person, but then of course we didn't. But that was the question that they asked, was about how do we use this moment as a way to lift science up and to cheer it on. And I think, unfortunately, it's partisan, which is ridiculous, but it is. So how do we make scientists heroes? How do we say you can be smart, but you also have to be brave and you have to be badass, right? That it's not, you know, glasses and labs and kind of coming out and awkwardly shuffling your notes when you accept a big prize. It is somebody going, this is real, this is important, we need to do it now, take me seriously. Like suddenly I'm like, I love you, whoever you are, that character, great. It's kind of, you know, what's like super Fauci of it. And the fact that we know this immunologist's name.
Right.
Yes. Home run number one. We know a scientist's name. Great. Yeah. And we use that to keep going, I think. And it will take storytellers so that the scientists aren't the people that the heroes go to get an answer. They are the heroes. They're the ones who are like, you know, and truth is such a universal theme and such a universal goal to fight for. It is heroism in and of itself, right? So how can we make the people who that's their job? You know, and they don't always get it right. And the truth changes as the world grows and we know more, and that's fine. How can that be a good thing instead of like, you're wrong, you know? Anyway.
Yeah, I think the idea of like figuring out how to take politics out of science in what we're creating is it's a noble intention.
Yes,
indeed.
And I was stunned. I watched a thing on Larry Kramer, and I was stunned. I didn't know that Fauci was around back, you know, during the AIDS crisis. And I was like looking at footage of him, and I'm like, he has been fighting the good fight for a long time.
And so is Deborah Birx too.
Yes.
She did incredible work around that time.
Well, I mean, I guess we can take great comfort in knowing that there will never be a Jack Bauer version of the pandemic, right? Is because if it was called 24, it'd be 24 months, and every month it'd be like him, you know, like, do we have a vaccine yet? Damn it, you know, and then it cuts to the next month. And that would be it. It would be a very boring show.
Yeah, it would be a show about people not wearing masks and doing just fine.
Yeah,
torturing coronavirus.
There's no hand-to-hand combat. You can't punch anybody because everyone's scared to touch anyone. It's like, I'm going to shame you very loudly.
Yeah.
6 feet away.
What was that?
No, it's like Jack Bauer just yelling every time, 6 feet away.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, question from Kate. Lauren, you mentioned the totally different tree of life for viruses. Does your husband actually come down to the side of, yes, viruses are alive, or on the side of they are not alive, not biological organisms, but only perhaps goes as far as they are biological genome particles?
That is a perfect question, and it is answered in my play.
Oh, fantastic.
He ranted exactly about that. And he actually, spoiler, he's like, I actually don't care. He doesn't care if they're alive or not. They are what they are. They have their own rules. So in some ways, his whole point, which is very Nathan thing to do, you expect like a big battle and he's going to go to bat for one side or the other. And he's like, it's kind of a pointless question because yes, they are alive. Okay, great. Does that change anything? No, they are not alive. We're still doing the same thing. So the idea of thinking about they're in between somehow. And I mean, his point is probably a little bit, it is right in the middle because viruses being the critique that they're not alive is, well, they need other things to sustain themselves. And his point was like, doesn't everything like humans do too? So are we not alive? Well, of course we are. So anyway, but it's a perfect question and one that scientists can absolutely fight in their own way. And of course, my husband is the one that goes, why are we fighting about this? Let's just like learn.
Here's a really good question for the group, probably for Deric in particular. Oh God, I just lost the question. Where'd it go? Okay, from Val. How do you think the near future is useful for addressing current issues?
Near future. I mean,
You write in the near future, don't you?
what's that? Yeah, I mean,
Right.
yes and no. I mean, we joke about it in our show about like, you know, what the events of today, how they shape the events of tomorrow. If we all survive or not, it'll be a good place, right? It's like depending on if you want the Mad Max post-apocalyptic future. Which by the way, I was low-key kind of disappointed at the beginning of March, where I thought I was going to have to get my shoulder pads and put the spikes on them.
Yeah, well, I thought I was going to be surviving in the stand, and there'd be like,
yeah, exactly. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
But I think, I think that's definitely front of mind for most writers, is their storytelling about, especially if you're dealing with, as we call it, 5 minutes from tomorrow storytelling, right? Of like what the world looks like. So my writing partner and I, we have another project that we're working on, and it is kind of told from a vantage point of about 50 or so years in the future, and so we've put more about green energy in there, and just stuff like that, the sort of the ambitions and sort of what the sort of I guess you want to say the positive storytelling that you want to kind of inject into your own stories of like what you want to envision the future to be.
Right.
What we all dream about. Look, I mean, come on now. It's like, this is 2020. Where's my flying car? Where are my jetpacks? It's like
hoverboard.
We barely got
all
a jetpack.
All I wanted was a hoverboard.
Right? That's it. All I want to be able to do is like take a vacation on the moon in 2020. That's not happening. There's no bubble cities on the moon. Our last check, right?
But it's Elon Musk working on it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of questions here.
I think so. That's kind of like, it's always like, what is it that you want to see in the way of like from what is it, Andy Weir, right? The Martian.
Yeah.
That that has the sort of like the achievements of what we can do if we we put our minds to it and envision a future that's that will benefit everybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted reading the questions on the side here. So, all right. Kevin, why don't you try this one? Do you think the public's draw to Contagion at the beginning of the pandemic was because it gave us an ending at a time when we couldn't imagine how this was going to play out?
Oh God, that's a great question. I think that they just answered their own question, don't you? I think that's totally, we are looking for a solution. And yeah, I think that's a great question, but it kind of answers itself. And that is, you found an ending, and yeah, I wish I could articulate it. I think the question answered itself. Yeah.
Okay, well, here's another one then.
An easy one. Geez.
I know. Okay, so then hold on.
What's the capital of Washington
Here's a more
State?
complicated one. So some people have found it hard to concentrate on different media, for example, not reading or not watching TV dramas. How are storytellers shifting to address the changing attention of consumers? You also mentioned you were on a deadline for something right now, so I'm curious if that is what's your deadline for? Does that have anything to do with the pandemic? And are you thinking about how to attract your audience and shift what you're writing based on what's going on?
Well, right now what I'm writing is like sort of a Gone Girl story. I just my latest book has to do with, it's called The Bad Sister, and it's it's a serial killer returning to it's sort of a copycat to a serial killer situation from 50 years ago. So most of my stuff is sort of escapism, and I look up on current events there. I like to look at those through the past. So
sure.
Most of my fun part about writing is that I can go do these wonderful flashbacks. And so I flash back to 1970 for a serial killer from 50 years ago. And so I really enjoy doing the perspective, because you do discover things that you didn't know that they were going on at the time. And I think we're probably going to find that about the pandemic. We're going to find out all this stuff that went under this plays under the surface. I mean, you look at anything like that came out during World War II. You're not going to have anything about like the Japanese American soldiers that were fighting in Germany or the Tuscany Airmen, and so I like kind of going back and finding these things later.
That's really interesting.
I don't know.
I feel like right now we, in the world of social media and 24-hour news, there's so much immediacy that it feels like we know everything that's going on.
Yes.
But undoubtedly, there are huge things that are happening that we know nothing about.
Right.
So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that emerges over the next, 5, 10, 20 years.
Yes. Yeah. So.
I also think it's interesting to note in terms of some of the questions I've been reading. There was a great one about how can we as scientists help science win? And again, I'll mention that Aspen Institute call because one of my personal heroes, Dr. Mae Jemison, who's the first Black woman in space in NASA, mentioned something that I think is really important, which I think one of the things we can do is to be honest about when science has failed us. And when science has taken advantage of Black men and women, when science has, avoided women, giving women their own category in certain types of medicine, and the ways that science, I think we can be honest about the times when it was biased and bigoted, and that science, so if we can't be honest about that, we can't trust where science is going and that it's going to a place that's going to be good for all of us. So I think that's one of the stories we can tell. And I
think you just answered another one of the questions.
Oh, did I?
No, we can help science regain public credibility. There you go. We only have a few more minutes. This time has passed very quickly, and there are a lot of good questions here. So let's see. This is a fun one. I grew up in an era of radioactive. This is from Lisa. I grew up in an era of the radioactive horror movies, giant ants, and it was a clear reflex to our, I think, reaction to our fears becoming our entertainment. I'm wondering how our fears in association with a virus may become a new wave of films, assuming it's not just remaking Contagion.
Whoa.
So, to me, that's like, is this inspiring to you? In like that, it's that entertainment versus education side of it. Like, is there a fun aspect to all of this? Is there I think we're already starting to see some stories. There are some some web series like Love in the Time of Corona, or that Michael Sheen, David Tennant thing, which personally I find hysterical. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that, but what is there a way that we can turn this into fun sci-fi in the future?
Oh yeah, I think Lauren, you just inspired me. I'm gonna pitch it next week because I'm gonna rip you off. It's called I Really Don't Care, Do You? It's about a sensitive virus that gains awareness and then just watches TV all day long. That's it. So
Yes, I'm so down for that.
Yes.
All right.
I'll subscribe.
Okay, this is we're like, I'm going to try to find one more real question while we still have time for it. So let's see. Okay.
To add that real quick, yes, I think that there are I know a lot of writers and friends and colleagues that definitely, because of the shaping of events right now, that you're going to see, like as Lauren brought up, earlier, it's like we saw so many different 9/11 stories, and after 9/11, right? Such a big impact thing that you can't help but tell these type of stories, and there's going to be all sorts of interesting stories that you would never have imagined that would come out of this.
And I like to joke, there's going to be a lot of terrible plays about this in the next 10 years. And then after 10 years, there are going to be a lot of great plays.
Yes.
Yep. Yes. Like I told Lauren, I said, I am about to release my 9/11 play.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the perfect time.
It's time.
Yeah, it's time, right? Yeah.
Okay, so I think that these sort of two different questions that have to do with the environment here. One is, I'm going to read both of these because I think we can sort of address them at the same time. These will be our last questions, I think. How are you thinking about stories at the intersection of climate change and COVID? And then slightly different, but also referencing the environment, can you talk about the many positive aspects of the pandemic, like on the environment? on the opportunity to have extended time with one's children, the chance to slow down, look at nature, learn or relearn to cook, listen to your inner voice. My personal favorite is the airplaneless sky. There are lots of airplanes in my sky. I got to be honest. I live near the Van Nuys Airport. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's two very different questions, really. But one is about positive aspects of this, and the other is about how this may be bringing more attention to climate change. So, which to me is a positive
I think they intersect, though, right? I mean, isn't that the whole thing? It's like because of the positive impacts that you want to have lasting impacts. And it's like, so that, you know, that we have now actually proof positive that because we've been able to lessen our footprint in so many different ways, that, you know, of the changes that we thought that would take years happened in a couple of weeks and months, right? I mean, the whole thing of like the air pollution alone here in Los Angeles. I mean, you know, the air pollution just dropped dramatically in only like less than a month's time, right? And then,
yeah, although I still think that has to do with the fact that we had a lot of rain right then.
Really? There was rain? I don't even remember
We had rain like the whole first month. It was kind of amazing. It was like you were cozy inside with the rain outside, and the air was beautiful. And now we have smoke. But yeah.
It's also a different, I mean, I think I always just go back to metaphors. This is one big metaphor for preparing for stuff. We can prepare for things. We can prepare for climate change in a way. And if you use the metaphor of this pandemic, there was more we could have done. There's more research that could have been ongoing. We could have, I mean, again, Trump just nixed the whole pandemic prevention task force. So great. Thanks for that. You know, and the issue with climate change is that it's slow. It takes a hell of a long time. We are good in a crisis. We understand it. We go, oh, I see why this was important. Climate change is a hard sell, even though we can point to all these wildfires and hurricanes and floods, but it doesn't seem as concentrated as a pandemic when you're like, I get what the bad guy is. I get what we're supposed to do. So I think we have to keep reminding ourselves of all of these crises and say, what would we have done if we had known? Well, we do know it's coming. So what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
And you look for stories that, like, if you want to take a positive spin on it, you can look at, you know, what's happening at the hospitals with the frontline workers and things like that. And, you know, people who are working in grocery stores, I mean, there are so many inspirational stories that are going to come out of this.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm confident about that. And yet at the same time, since there is no solution yet, it's hard to kind of take that positive spin. So you do have to kind of look at the individual stories and the, you know, and approach it that way, I think.
Well, it's challenging too, because like, you know, as Gillian pointed out, and I pointed out earlier, it's just that if it was just a pandemic that we were dealing with, and that was all that we had to worry about, that, you know, it's like, then we would be able to just focus on that. But since there's so many other things, and then in the front of it is still, we're not out of the pandemic, even though people have been acting like the pandemic's over, like it was just a vacation or something. It's just like, well, pandemic's over. I'm gonna go back to not, you know, listening to anybody. It's mind-boggling. But aside from that, you know, but there's just so many other things that, you know, that you're like, oh yeah, there is climate change. That's still happening. That's not like that was put on pause, you know, thanks to the pandemic. It wasn't like climate change said, you know what? You guys got a lot to worry about right now. We're going to take some time off and wait for this to be over. Then we'll get back to, you know, you having to worry about this. It doesn't work that way. It's all of this is still happening right now. And I think that's the challenge, is trying to address that in the middle of all that. And that's, you know, I think it's tough to do, but we have to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, to me, that's the, when we had like our prep conversation the other day, I had taken down the note that was, in a highly polarized environment like we're in now, does that change the role of the storyteller? And I think what's interesting to me is I want to say, like, yeah, like we have a responsibility to tell stories about climate change, but honestly, go watch like The Day After Tomorrow, and not that is an accurate representation of what climate change is going to look like. But we've had so many movies that have shown like, this is what the future is going to look like, with fires and hurricanes and fire tornadoes and things like that. And it's literally all happening right now. So I don't have the answer to this question, but like, how do we do it differently so people realize that like it's here? That's a really dark note to end on. I'm not supposed to.
I thought you were going to end on that nice positive note.
I might as well just said, we all going to die. Just give up. Like, we had a good run, people.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right. Well, it was lovely chatting with you all.
It was a great conversation. And I think that, listen, the big takeaway, and I think it's a mantra for the exchange, is that stories matter. When you had asked Gillian, is it really about escapism or is it about shining a light on the things that are happening? It's that wonderful combination of those two things, because sometimes even the storylines that focus on what really is happening, they can be escapist in their own ways too. And I think that people do use entertainment in different ways to be able to dive in, feel something different, be in a different world, experience something differently, because that's not their life. And maybe it helps people understand science a little better, because I think, we're all looking at the ways that can happen, but just feel a little differently about the world through the magic of reading a book, watching a play, or streaming something on Netflix. And I like all of those things. They all work for me. So thank you to every single one of you. This was a really great conversation. We were looking forward to having it. And, Rick and I always say we learn something every time we do one of our events. So thank you for helping us learn something new. We very much appreciate it.
Hey, Deric, before you sign off, one of our audience members was asking what show you're writing for right now.
Oh, it's called Legacies on the CW.
Fantastic. So we also want to let you know that next week we will have Sean B. Carroll. We always like to use the initial because there are two Sean Carrolls. We're talking about Sean B. for biology. Sean Carroll from HHMI and a member of the National Academy of Sciences will be with us, and he will be in conversation with our advisory board member, Seth MacFarlane. So that promises to be a very interesting conversation. I think we're describing it, what Rick, as freewheeling and spontaneous, because with those two,
how are you gonna? We don't know what to expect.
We don't know what to expect, but what we do want, come and hear it. It should be interesting. And Sean has a new book out, so they'll be exploring some of that. And as I say, it should be an interesting conversation. So come back next week, and thank you for being here this week.
And thanks to all of our panelists, and thank you, Gillian, for moderating a great discussion.
Yes. Bye.